Good morning, everyone. Oh, okay. Thank you for letting me know that. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us this morning. So, I want to start off with a very interesting concept that is related to this week's Torah portion, and I think it's something really important to reflect on as we're talking about this topic of Lashon Hara and everything in between and everything that is connected to Lashon Hara. You know, this week's Torah portion and then in last week's Torah portion, there's a very important connection in between the two. What does the end of last week's Torah portion speak about? It speaks about Miriam, Moshe's sister, right, being secluded and because she spoke Lashon Hara against her brother, right? She spoke about her brother, and I'm not going to go into the whole story, right? But God said that she has to go chutz lamachnes. She was the first one to get the punishment of saras, right? The spiritual leprosy that we the way we sort of translate, it's not really leprosy, but that spiritual leprosy. And on a side note, the Jewish people waited for her, even though they wouldn't wait for anybody else, but her great merit of who she was, a Jew, one of the leaders of the Jewish people. Also, because she watched Moshe when he was a baby to see what happened. So, in that merit, the whole Jewish nation waited for her. Can you imagine? Right? Everybody waited just for her, for one individual. Just on a side note, you see the power of one individual. Should never underestimate our power. What one individual could, as we say in Yiddish, tu oif, right, accomplish. What one individual can accomplish, and God is showing, right, even while he was punishing her, right, which we're going to elaborate in a minute, even while he was punishing her, right, God was showing that, hey, everybody don't think she's like, you and me, right? She is extremely spiritual, extremely holy, and the whole nation is going to wait for her. But back to our point, right? So she spoke Lashon Hara, and she got punished. What's the next parsha? The next parsha is the story of the Meraglim, the spies, right? We spoke about it for a couple of minutes yesterday in our morning minute, right? It was more of like an afternoon minute. We still called it a morning minute, whatever, side point, right? But the story of the Meraglim. Now, Rashi, right there on the spot, Rashi says, Lama nimsuchu, why is it compared? Why is it close? Why are these stories next to each other? Right? It's not necessarily happened one after another. Could be did, could be didn't, right? But why are these two stories put right next to each other in the Torah? And there's a rhyme and reason in the Torah why everything's next to each other. It's not just it happened to work out that way, right? We learn many laws out of actually why certain laws are next to each other, certain stories are next to each other, because everything in the Torah is, even the order of it is in the Torah. Yes, go ahead, Emily.
It's not chronological in that respect?
So there's a very good question. It could be it is, could be it's not, right? There's a tremendous debate amongst the commentaries, which is beyond the scope of our conversation today. The great commentaries, Rashi and the Ramban and others that sort of take, I don't want to call sides, but sort of, go on a certain direction. If the Torah is written in chronological order or not, right? Is the Torah written in chronological order or is it not written? But even if the Torah is written in chronological order, right? But it could have been that the Torah threw in a law and then said the story, right? The end of this week's Torah portion, right, speaks about the laws of Chala, right? Speaks about the laws of agriculture, some of other agricultural laws. When you go into the land of Israel, right, that you have to do X, Y, and Z. Right, so could have put that first, and then the story of the spies. Right, so even if you hold that it is in chronological order, what is a debate? It's a machlokes, right? There's two different opinions regarding this, and if it's in chronological order or not. But even if you hold that it is in chronological order, right? There's still a reason why these are right next to each other. There's nothing in between these two stories. There could have been a law thrown in here and something else, right? So Rashi says, why are these two parshas next to each other? And Rashi famously says, because the Meraglim, what was a great Aveirah of the Meraglim? There's a list of them. But what was the epitome, sort of the head Aveirah, right, that sort of spread into other things? Lashon Hara, speaking evil about the land. Right, speaking negative about the land, right? And therefore, right, as Rashi points out, right? Later on in the punishment, and the commentaries speak out, and I don't want to get into the graphic details of their punishment, but the Meraglim, the spies themselves, had a different punishment than the rest of the Jewish people. What was the rest of the Jewish people? 40 years, right? Every Tisha B'Av, the 9th of Av, which was the day that the Meraglim sinned, right? The sin of the Meraglim, right? They would, a little morbid, but they would dig themselves a grave, right? And that was their bed for that night. Whoever woke up, good, climbed that, and whoever didn't wake up, covered them up, right? But the Meraglim in 40 years, right? And over a span of 40 years, that generation passed away, right? And the next generation went to the land of Israel. But what was the excuse me, what was the punishment of the Meraglim themselves? So the Midrash tells us, and it's based off the verse, their tongues got long, and there's these maggots that went on their tongue, and through that went into their body and killed them, right? And I don't want to get into graphic detail, right? But it was a different con. Why? Right? Because they sinned with their tongue, right? So their punishment came through their tongue. But there was many others: lack of belief in God, right? Also, as we spoke yesterday, having a bad vision, right? They had many other things that fell under the Averot, right? But what was the thing that is considered their prime Avera? Was Lashon Hara. And therefore, Rashi says the Meraglim didn't learn from Miriam, who did Lashon Hara and she got punished. They didn't learn from her. Their punishment was even more severe, and that's why the two parashas are next to each other. And I think it's important for us, and as we are now learning this during this period of time, learning about Lashon Hara, we can't pass by these two parashas, right, without talking about it, right, and expanding on this idea, right, because this is what we're learning. This is what we're doing. So there's a couple of questions that have to be asked. Number one, right, you think Miriam maliciously spoke evil? When we think Lashon Hara, what comes to our mind? This person, this lady, they want to like hurt people, and they want to they're gossipers, and they're at Kiddush, and they want all the information, or they're at a barbecue, right? Or they're out to coffee with someone, right? Or drinks, and they need to get all the gossip and be in the know, or hurt the other person, or get above the other person in a certain way, or get back to them. That's sort of Lashon Hara. You think that's how Miriam was? Don't forget, the whole nation of the Jewish people waited for her. That means she was a righteous person. The well that the Jewish people were able to drink from, the sustenance, came in the merit of Miriam. Right? We'll see that in next week's Torah portion, right? That's why when she passed away, the whole thing of hitting the rock. Because the the Be'er Miriam, that's what it's called, the well of Miriam. So do you think she was out, let me get Moshe, let's go. Of course not. But still, when you talk, you have to still be careful when you talk on her level. Because Lashon Hara doesn't make a difference if you have good intentions, if you don't follow the rules of Toelis. Just because you have good intentions, or just because you're trying to bring out a point, or just because you're looking out for the other one, for the other person, right? Miriam was like thinking about Moshe's wife. You had good intentions, but it didn't follow the rules of Toelis. That's still Lashon Hara. It's still Lashon Hara. And that's I'm petrified, right? We just talk. And how often do we reflect and think, is this following the rules of Toelis? Our biggest excuse usually is, I'm not doing this maliciously. I have good intentions. You think Miriam didn't? You think Miriam was malicious? That's lesson number one that we have to remember. We have to remember how careful we have to be. How much we have to reflect and think about what we're actually saying. And just because we have good intentions does not mean to say that it's okay. I'm not a bad person. How many times have you heard that? Right? I don't want to hurt anybody. Doesn't mean to say you're not. Doesn't mean to say that it's still permitted. The other thing that we have to learn from is the commentaries ask, 1 second, the Meraglim, the spies. Okay, so they didn't learn from Miriam, but who did they speak negative against? A piece of property, a land, Eretz Yisrael. Yes, Eretz Yisrael is great. And we're all dying to be in Eretz Yisrael, I hope. We're all dying to live in Eretz Yisrael, right? And we should advocate for Eretz Yisrael, but the greatest advocacy that we could do for Eretz Yisrael is by visiting Eretz Yisrael or moving to Eretz Yisrael. And I don't want to get off topic, but before I left Eretz Yisrael, we lived there for a couple of years. I spoke to my rabbi, right? Just like, if you want to know if something's kosher or not, right? There's a mitzvah of living in Eretz Yisrael, right? But it's still just it's still a piece of property. What's the Lashon Hara? What's the Lashon Hara? And the commentaries explain something so deep. Lashon Hara is not necessarily because the other person's going to get hurt. Lashon Hara is because you are speaking negative. It's a different mindset. And that sort of ties into what we said. If it's because the other person's getting hurt, well, if I'm going to do it in a way that the other person is going to get hurt, Lashon Hara is because you're speaking negative about a piece of property, you're speaking negative about an individual, an organization, or you are still speaking negative. You are still harming your spirituality, your tongue, your ability to speak, the gift that God gave us. You are doing something negative with it. That's Lashon Hara. Doesn't make a difference, right? If you have good intentions, doesn't mean it make a difference how the person gets hurt. It doesn't get hurt. Let's say you're speaking about a multi-billionaire, right? And your little conversation with your friend in over a barbecue or over coffee in the coffee shop somewhere, right, is going to make no difference to the person's revenue, to the person's fame, right? Your little gossip is going to make no difference. You know that, right? This person's famous, billionaire, right? Doesn't even know that you exist, right? Probably doesn't even know that that coffee shop exists. Probably doesn't even know that your little town exists, right? He's somewhere, he has his private plane and whatever it is. So what's the harm? I'm not harming that person. I'm not doing any damage. That's the Lashon Hara, because you are speaking something negative. And that's another important lesson that we learn from the Meraglim, right? That it doesn't make a difference on who the individual is or what the individual is. It's you. You're harming yourself. You're harming yourself. And we see the severity of Lashon Hara, that even though there was a lack of faith in God, because they said, lo na'aleh, we can't go up. God just did all the miracles, which is not for our comment. We're not giving a parsha class right now, right? But God just did all the miracles. Hello, what's wrong with you guys? But the prime avera, they speak about this, but the prime avera that is spoken about is Lashon Hara. Because when you speak Lashon Hara, you are also not believing in God. When you're speaking negative about other people, right, you're showing a lack of faith, right, that whatever happens, God orchestrates it, right? And unless it's toelas, which is for a benefit, by you speaking about that person, you think you're helping the person out, or you're letting the other person. There's a lack of faith in God also. The lack of faith in humanity, and there's a lack of faith in yourself, because you need to just spew all that out, get it out there. You're the one that's going to make a difference. Doesn't fall under the rules of toelas. Let God take care of it. You know, God's fine. God has ability to take care of everything. And if he feels right now is not the time, we should probably believe God. He knows what he's doing, and now is not the time to take care of this individual. So I think those are two important lessons. And the third lesson that I want to bring out is the actual Rashi that speaks about the reason why they got so punished is because they didn't learn from someone else. They didn't learn from Miriam. And this is a broader topic, right? But primarily for here also, but a broader topic that we get punished more. And I usually don't like talking about punishment, but it's a reality. There's a concept of consequences and punishments when we don't do what's right, right? we don't judge other people. God is the one that's going to judge us, and thank God for that, right? You know, because he knows what's in our hearts. He knows what we're trying and how much opportunity we have. But the commentaries explain that the more opportunities that we have to learn, the greater severity is what we're doing wrong. So if, let's say 100 years ago, there was this boy or girl born in Iowa, right? Or, you know, I don't know, who knows where, right? In the middle of nowheresville, and there's no Jewish person. There's like a handful of Jews there, and no rabbi, no nothing, right? And, you know, the closest Jewish community is, a horse ride of, a day and a half or whatever, right? And he comes up to heaven, and God says, oh, wow, at least you knew you're Jewish and you're proud of it. I didn't give you any opportunity. It was still a little bit. You could have ridden a day's ride, right? And again, God judges, not me. But, you know, in 2021, right, someone born in the same place comes up to heaven, right? God says, hey, you heard of something called an internet? I created phones. I created technology that is a tiny little thing on your watch, not my watch, right, but other people's watches, right, or a phone, right? And you could go ahead and search, what does it mean to be Jewish? And yes, you'll get a lot of different websites, right? Some that are legit, some are not legit, and it gives you the opportunity to at least study it. Right? You can run into a website called h.cod, Chabad.org, Torah.org, right? You could bump into something on Facebook, different programs, go on YouTube, tons of classes there. But you decided not to. Now again, I'm not judging. God's the one that judges. Very different, someone that, grows up in Jerusalem, right? Where there's much greater opportunity, or New York, or even here in Jacksonville, right? You see, you have friends or somebody, you see a class, you decide to hook onto it and you listen. We have to learn and find when opportunities are in front of us, we have to take advantage of it and realize that there's a greater consequence when we don't, right? And that's part of the lesson of learning. The Meraglim were punished more because just right before God showed, look, I do not like Lashon Hara. I don't. I punish for Lashon Hara right away. And they did not learn from that. They did not take that lesson. And they went ahead and spoke Lashon Hara. They could have made their own calculations. And yes, the commentators explain why they did it and what was the calculations. It's not, again, we're not doing a parsha class. But the main purpose is, still, they did not learn from that. And that's for Lashon Hara, and it's for everything else. When we have opportunities, or we have the opportunity to seek out, we have the opportunity that something's in front of us, we see something happening, we see someone growing, we see classes available, and we don't grab onto it, God's not as happy. God looks at that as a higher severity. Now, again, God's the one that judges. Thank God I'm not the judge, and thank God humanity's not judges, right? And God knows what's in our hearts, and God knows what we try, and each person has to reflect internally on where they're growing and what they're holding, but we have to constantly grow. We have to constantly take advantage. So this technology that we have, on one hand, is great. We have greater opportunity, right? Martha at the beaches could be listening to us right now in gym, right? For a half-hour drive away. And whoever else on Facebook. But at the same time, there's also, with greater opportunity comes greater consequences, right? And responsibility. Because at the same time, if we don't take advantage of that, that's the important lesson that we have to learn also. So there's 3 important lessons that we learn. Number 1, from Miriam, I promise you we're not greater than Miriam. I don't know about you guys, I know I'm not. Right? There's no well of water coming out of my backyard, right? All there is some water with chlorine in there, right? But of course she had good intentions, right? But still, if it doesn't follow the rules of Toelas, no good. Number 2, Lashon Hara is not if the other person's gonna get hurt. Lashon Hara is because you are hurting yourself by speaking negative. You're the one that's talking bad. That's what Lashon Hara is. And therefore, even when you speak about a land, still Lashon Hara. And number three, we have to see the severity, the responsibility that comes from opportunity of learning. When you have opportunity to learn it, you squander it, you don't take advantage of it, there's a greater responsibility and greater consequences. So there's greater growth, but at the same time, there's greater responsibility. And that's really in life in general, it should be that way, right? But especially in our Judaism, in our growth, we have to constantly remember that. Any questions or comments on what we just spoke about? No one? Okay. So let's get on today.
Oh, wait, I had something.
Oh, okay. Thank you, Marilyn. Go ahead.
All right, well, if we could keep in front of us all the time what happened to Miriam, who was not vindictive or anything like that. She was just stating a fact, and she got in trouble. That's so scary.
Yeah.
That's really scary.
Of course it's scary. 100%. You know, and that's the point I'm trying to bring up. I'm not trying to scare us, but I'm trying to bring reality in, that we have to be very careful with what we say. The other day I was talking to someone, and I was trying to bring an example, and I stopped for a second, and he said, "Why are you pausing?" I said, "One second, I'm teaching Shonara." Right? I said, I have to, before I give you this example, right? I have to see if I'm allowed to give it. I'm teaching this book, right? And I know that this didn't come out because I have a virtual background, right? But I'm teaching this book, a Lashon Hara, right? 1 second. And it's making me more aware. I'm gaining tremendously. And I thank you all for joining me on this, right? I'm gaining tremendously. And I paused for a second and I said, you know what? Let's just talk about the concept. I'm not going to give this example right now, right? And a lot of times when I give examples, I thank God I've been around. So I'm able to say, this is from someone from a different city or someone from somewhere else. So it is possible, right? Even if it's someone from here or if I'm talking to someone somewhere else. I've lived in many different places, right? And I've gone to different conventions and bumped into a lot of different people. So a lot of times I just prefix it, said, this conversation I had was with someone from somewhere else, right? And that could be all over the place. So it's very hard to narrow it down, right? But yeah, all right.
Wait, and one other thing. What if somebody upsets you and you need to vent it, and the person that you're talking to is, someone that you're really close to, and it's not going to go any further than that person?
So two things. Number one, right? We spoke about if you need a vent, right? We spoke about that in the past. There are proper ways of doing it, right? But you have to make sure that you're doing it in a proper conduct. And we spoke about that in the past, right? Not always, because you need a vent is it permitted, right? But at the same time, it is healthy to speak things out. So you could speak it either in a hypothetical way, make sure you don't mention the person's name, right? Or allude to, my next door neighbor, when you take out the garbage can, I'm not going to say who it is, right? You only have to, like, come on, right? So, you have to be careful with that. But there is sometimes you do need to let things out, and you have to have that one individual that you speak to. But at the same time, you also have to make sure that you don't give off too much information. You can talk more about a hypothetical situation. And I'm telling you, it works. When you talk more in a hypothetical way, it does work, right? It does work to let the steam out. That's number one. And number two, we have to be very careful. Your statement that you said that that they're not going to share anything. It's important to have faith in people, but unfortunately, right, things slip, right? Things slip, right? We're humans, right? And if that person's next to that other person or whatever, or someone else, and they, even though, and I'm not judging anybody, I'm not saying that they're going to do it intentionally. You have to be very careful with that. But we, again, you do have to sometimes vent. You need to have that outlet, all right? But at the same time, it has to be done with the criteria that we spoke about. Make sure you don't mention the person's name, you don't allude to it, right? You talk more in a hypothetical thing, or sometimes better to talk to someone that is not necessarily affiliated with this community, right? So if let's say you have someone from out of town or whatever, and you could, vent to them and therefore not give them names, and they won't know the details. The details won't help them know what's going on, and they not necessarily need to repeat it over because they're not part of your community. So that's also sometimes a good way of doing it. But yeah, that's difficult. We have to vent sometimes, but at the same time, we have to make sure that it fits with our Lashon Hara, the rules of Lashon Hara. Good questions. Any other questions? Okay, Martha, I saw your questions on the chat. Just very quickly, I don't want to get into the parsha, but yes, the Torah says, the first one was, a dark complexion. Rashi right there on the spot says that it's referring to her beauty. All right, Rashi right there on the parsha says, the spies made up stories. Both seem relevant to what's happening these days. They made up stories, but listen to my morning minute yesterday. They made up those stories because they saw it in a certain way. There were people that died, right? And the fruits were big, right? But we, as the title of my class says, my morning minute was, seeing is not believing, right? When you go into something with a certain mindset, your eyes see it that way and process it in the way that what you want to see, right? And therefore, seeing is not necessarily believing, right? Even though they say pictures are 1,000 words, right? But seeing is not always believing, because if you're going in with a certain mindset, so then you're going to focus on that negativity, right? And also what you're going to see is you're going to translate it into something negative, right? And that was our morning minute yesterday. Okay, let's move on if that's okay with everyone. We're good? Okay, so page 156, page 156, day 48. Oh, wow, 48. You know what's special about 48? Anybody know what 48 is? No one? Emily? 48? The last chapter of Pirkei Avos, right, is the 48 ways of wisdom, right? 48 ways of wisdom is on the last chapter of Pirkei Avos. Noach Weinberg has a series on it, and it's a beautiful series. We actually did we did it one time. We went through them in our morning class, our Wednesday class, a couple of years ago. We went through all that. But that's 48. Okay, and of course, 1948 is when Israel became independent. But okay, I'm digressing over here. Let's get to our question. Questions like this: you are an accountant for a large Jewish-owned company. Of course, you're Jewish, you're an accountant. And you have discovered, right, that the chief financial officer has been siphoning money out of the business funds. What should you do with this information? All right, so we've had similar situations in the past where you are aware of something that's happening, right? And what's it called again? And are you allowed to tell someone else, right? The boss or something like that, right? We've had similar. Let's see what they're saying over here. What should you do with this information, right? So helping someone receive restrict for loss is considered a constructive purpose, and therefore you should be allowed to relate what happened. First, you should verify your suspicion if you're not certain. Then you should speak to the perpetrator if possible. However, a problem arises if reporting the incident would cause consequences that are beyond what halacha would allow. Since halacha does not allow people to be jailed for monetary offense, reporting such an incident to the police or to someone else who would then report it to the police would be a problematic. In case like this, a competent rabbi must be consulted. All right. So again, usually they pick cases, right, that they're trying to bring out a point, right? And the point is like this, right, that we've spoken about in the past. Yes, we spoke about, well, you're allowed to go tell the rabbi, things like that. Over here, what about you? Are you allowed to go ahead and tell the police? Are you allowed to, go ahead and be part of that investigation? Or, so the first part we're familiar with, right? First part we're familiar with, right? Try to speak to the person, right? Try to get him to make sure that you have all the details. Go tell the boss, all right? They can work something out for the person to pay them back, all right? So that we're familiar with, that we've spoken about. That what they're adding in over here is a very interesting caveat, something that we have to think about. And sometimes we don't think about this, and that's why it's very important. In Judaism, of course, there's a mitzvah to follow the laws of the country, right? We're supposed to follow the laws of the country, but at the same time, right, the laws of the country, when they go against Judaism, right, we're at a conflict, right? So, if let's say the law of the country would be, thank God we're not living in such a regime, right? But let's say the laws of the country would be that you're not allowed to do a brit milah, right? In the past, Jewish people had that, right? So you're not allowed to do a brit milah. So even though there's a mitzvah to follow the laws of the country, but that doesn't supersede, doesn't take over the actual laws of the Torah, right? That is, if it doesn't conflict with the laws of the Torah, right, then there's a mitzvah that you have to follow the laws of the country. Right? There's no law in the Torah that you have to stop at a red light. Right? There's no laws of the Torah, right, regarding other sort of things, right? Some FDA rules or things like that. But so therefore, you have to follow the laws of the Torah. But when the laws of the Torah go directly against the laws of the Torah, then you cannot follow it. Right? You cannot follow it. Right, and thank God we're living at a time where our country understands our religious rights, right? And we're very grateful to Hashem for allowing us to be living in such a country. But at the same time, things do arise, right? And I don't want to get too off topic. There's many rules, many halakhic ideas that it doesn't become permitted in the Torah just because the country says that that's permitted, right? And I don't want to talk about that too much, right? But regarding our discussion over here, this is a little gray area because there are laws in monetary law, and part of monetary law, even in monetary law, right? And monetary law is extremely complex. I'm going to say it straight out. I'm not an expert in it, far from it. Right? Monetary laws are extremely complex. There's a whole book of the Code of Jewish Law designated just for the laws of monetary law, right? And even within the laws of monetary law, there's put in there that we have to sometimes follow the rules of the country, right? Sort of it's minhag medina, whatever the custom of that place is, and it fits in, but at the same time, there's Jewish law that doesn't work with Jew, and that's where it's complicated, how it all works together. And therefore, what they're bringing out over here, and that's why you have to speak to a competent rabbi, right, that knows the laws, says that, yes, you have to root out bad. If you know information, it's important to do that. But at the same time, right, we don't just look at the right now. We look at what's going to happen, right? And therefore, right, if by saying this, right, you are going to cause a greater damage, right, to the individual, and that will be against Jewish law, we're not saying not to do it. That's not what they said. They said you have to ask a shaila, you have to ask a rabbi, because every situation is different. You have to know the details of the situation, and every situation is different. We spoke similarly about this, right, about a family. Right? We have to be very careful calling child services, and if it has to be done, 100%. I'm going to say that straight out, right? But we have to be very careful to first try to do it in a way that could work with Jewish law, right? Because unfortunately, their ways of doing things are not necessarily, right, what is good for us, right? We have to look at the outcome. Where are the kids going to end up, right? Is it really such a bad situation at home? Okay, so, in the secular world, right, they look at certain things, but is it really to that degree that they have to move out of the house? So they're going to lose out on so many other things. If the answer is yes, and he spoke to a rabbi, he spoke to the principals of the school, you spoke to people that know them, people that are involved in the community, so then yes, of course you have to. And I'll be the first one to say that. And thank God we have Jewish organizations that find homes for kids in Jewish homes. But that should be the last resort, right? Because a lot of times the outcome is not always the best outcome, right? And therefore, that's part of the same thing that it's trying to say over here, that not necessarily for the benefit of the kids, but regarding yourself, that you might cause something that will go against Jewish law, right? We have to be very careful that even though everything else fits, this is a caveat that has to be have to be thought about, right? That you have to speak to a competent rabbi, because in Judaism we don't have a concept that for monetary law, right? You get jail time. You have to pay back. That's it, right? Now, is that right or wrong? That's Jewish law, right? But of course it's right, because that's what we believe, right? But regarding secular law, we have to follow secular law, but you have to put that into account of what's going to be. So the lesson of today regarding these rules, right, is that when we are giving over information, even if it does fit all the criteria of Lashon Hara itself, right? Even though it does fit the laws of Toelas of Lashon Hara itself, we also have to sometimes consider outer factors that for yourself, you now might be part of a transgression or be an accomplice. And that sounds like a dirty word, but be an accomplice for causing Jewish law not to be done, right, to an individual. That is something that you have to speak to a rabbi about, right? You have to say, hey, at least we have to be aware of it. And that's what they're doing. We have to be aware of it. We don't think about it sometimes. We just think about the here and now, right? But if down the road, something might come out, we have to be aware of that. Okay, thank you everybody for coming or for joining us, not coming, but joining us on Zoom, right? I'm here all alone, and just FYI, next week, it's official. The Shabbos is official. In Eitz Chaim, you won't have to wear masks anymore. It's optional. If you want to wear masks, go ahead. All right. So please come and join us. If you weren't able to wear masks, which I totally understand, all right, feel free to join us. We have a beautiful class going on every other Shabbos. Will be next Shabbos, unlocking the closed book. We started the Amidah. All right. So join us for that. With the blessings of our forefathers and moving on. All right, we just talked about last week why we take 3 steps back and 3 steps forward. So we're going to go into the details of the Amidah. Join us for that, and feel free to join me here on Wednesday mornings if you want, or on Zoom. We're going to keep this class on Zoom also, but feel free to join me in person without masks. Yeah, and thank you all for joining us. I'm going to stop the recording now.